The great chamber of the Galactic Council stretched across 3 kilometers of polished crystal and ancient stone. 12,000 years of history lived in these walls. Species that had conquered death itself sat in judgment here. And in the center of it all, a single human woman stood alone. Ambassador felt very small. The alien representatives towered above her in their floating platforms, though with their 6 eyes and skin like living metal, watched her with something between pity and amusement. The beings of pure light contained in geometric shells pulsed with colors that translated roughly to boredom. Even the who had shown humanity some kindness over the past 42 years, seemed to regard her plea as the foolish hope of a child. She was asking for help. That was her mistake. The refugees had appeared at the edge of Council space 3 months ago. Their star was dying, they claimed. Their civilization was collapsing. They had nowhere else to go. The elder races had listened to their desperate broadcasts and done nothing. They calculated the cost of assistance and found it unfavorable. They debated the philosophical implications of intervention for 6 weeks without reaching a conclusion. They expressed sympathy but cited resource limitations. Only humanity said yes. Remembered the exact moment she had convinced her government to act. She had stood before the United Earth Parliament and spoken of history, of her own ancestors who had fled war and famine, of boats crossing dangerous seas, of strangers who had opened their doors when no one else would. "We know what it means to be desperate," she had said. "We know what it means when no one helps." And so the colony on 442b had opened its arms. 300,000 refugees arrived in the first wave. They were strange beings, tall and graceful, with silver skin and eyes like deep pools of black water. They spoke in musical tones that human translation software struggled to capture. They seemed grateful, so very grateful. His daughter Sophia had loved them. At 11 years old, Sophia saw the children as friends, not aliens. She learned their games. She taught them human songs. She came home each day with stories of her new companions, her eyes bright with the innocent joy of connection. "Mama," she had said one night, "why didn't the other aliens help them? Don't they care?" Had struggled to answer. How could she explain the cold mathematics of galactic politics to a child who still believed in kindness? "Sometimes," she had said finally, "people forget what it means to need help. We have to remind them." For 3 years the arrangement flourished. They integrated into human society with remarkable speed. They learned English, Mandarin, Spanish. They worked alongside humans in factories and farms. They sent their children to human schools. They celebrated human holidays and invited humans to their own quiet ceremonies. The Galactic Council watched with mild interest. Some elder races even expressed surprise at humanity's success. Perhaps these young ones were not as foolish as they seemed. Then came the morning that changed everything. Was in the council chamber when the first reports arrived. Her communication device buzzed with an emergency alert. Then another. Then a cascade of warnings that made her blood turn to ice. Across 47 human colonies, they had struck. They were not refugees. They had never been refugees. The supremacy, an ancient empire that the galaxy had believed destroyed centuries ago, had returned, and they had used humanity's compassion as their weapon. The refugees were scouts, infiltrators, soldiers wearing masks of gratitude. For 3 years they had mapped every human defense system. They had learned every weakness. They had positioned themselves in power plants, communication centers, military installations. They had smiled and thanked their human hosts while preparing their knives. The attack lasted 17 minutes. Defense grids fell silent. Command centers went dark. And in the final blow, they released a bioweapon specifically designed to target human DNA. It spread through the air, through water, through the food supplies that humans had so generously shared. On 442b, the death toll reached 400 million in the first hour. Tried to reach Sophia. She called and called until her voice broke. The communication lines were dead. The colony was silent. She stood in the Galactic Council chamber and screamed her daughter's name while alien diplomats watched with expressions she could not read. The final count came 3 days later, 2.3 billion dead, one-third of humanity's off-world population, erased in less than 20 minutes. And then the demands arrived. The Supreme Commander of the Supremacy broadcast his terms to the entire galaxy. Humanity would surrender unconditionally. Human colonies would become territory. Human citizens would serve the supremacy as workers and resources. Resistance would be met with the complete destruction of Earth itself. The Galactic Council convened an emergency session. The elder races urged humanity to accept. They were ancient and powerful, they explained. They had conquered half the galaxy once before. Humanity was young, weak, emotional. Better to survive as subjects than perish as defiant fools. The ambassador stood before the assembly and laughed. He described humanity as insects who had wandered into the path of gods. He thanked them for their hospitality during the infiltration. He particularly enjoyed the irony of humans feeding and sheltering the very soldiers who would enslave them. Listened to every word. She felt something changing inside her. The grief was still there, vast and terrible, but something else was growing alongside it. Something cold, something patient. When the ambassador finished speaking, the council turned to humanity's representative. They expected tears. They expected pleas for mercy. They expected the desperate bargaining of a defeated species. Stood slowly. She looked at the ambassador for a long moment. Then she looked at the elder races who had advised surrender. "We do not accept," she said. Her voice was quiet, but it carried through the great chamber like a blade. The ambassador stopped laughing. The elder races shifted uncomfortably. Even the ancients seemed to flicker with something like surprise. "You cannot win," they said. "You know this." Smiled, it was not a pleasant expression. "Perhaps," she said, "but you have made a mistake that your species will regret for 1,000 years." She turned and walked out of the chamber. Behind her, the galaxy watched in confusion. They did not understand what they had just witnessed. They would learn. Across human space, in bunkers and hidden bases and secret facilities, humanity began to remember what they truly were. They were the children of a death world. They were the survivors of ice ages and plagues and wars without end. They had crawled their way to the stars through blood and fire and stubborn refusal to die. And they had never, ever, forgotten how to make their enemies pay. The Supreme Commander expected human surrender within 90 days. This was a generous estimate, he believed. Most species collapsed within 30 days once they understood the hopelessness of their situation. Humans might take longer because they were stubborn and emotional, but the outcome was certain. What he received instead was silence. For the first week after the attack, the intelligence network reported normal patterns of human communication. Grief, anger, confusion, political leaders arguing about how to respond, military commanders demanding action while diplomats urged caution. It was exactly what the Supreme Commander expected. Chaos was the natural response of weak species facing superior force. Then the silence began. Human communication channels went dark. Not dead, exactly. The network still functioned, but the traffic disappeared. Trade ships stopped moving. Colony broadcasts stopped transmitting. Even the human representatives at the Galactic Council without explanation. The elder races sent concerned messages. They received no response. They sent demands for surrender. They received no response. For 60 days, humanity said nothing at all. Supreme Commander grew irritated. Silence was not in any of his strategic models. Species facing extinction should be begging for mercy. They should be offering territory, resources, population, anything to survive. This quiet was unnatural. It suggested something that did not want to consider. It suggested that humanity was not afraid. He ordered probing attacks against human border systems. His scouts reported something disturbing. The colonies were empty, not destroyed, not damaged, simply abandoned. Ghost towns floating in the void. Ships that should have been filled with refugees sat cold and silent in their docks. Where had everyone gone? The answer lay beneath 30,000 feet of water, on a planet that most aliens found terrifying. Earth, the human, a death world by any reasonable standard, crushing gravity that shattered the bones of unprepared visitors, an atmosphere that burned the lungs of most oxygen-breathing species, temperature variations that swung from boiling to freezing, predators and parasites and poisons in every ecosystem. And deep beneath the Pacific Ocean, in a facility that appeared on no map, Admiral James coordinated humanity's response. Was 73 years old. He had gray hair, dark skin marked by decades of service, and eyes that had seen too much death. He was also the highest-ranking military officer to survive the attack. His colleagues, his friends, his entire command structure had been assassinated in the first wave. He had lived only because he had been in transit between stations when the strike occurred. Now he sat in a bunker at the bottom of the sea and watched humanity transform itself. The Global Defense Compact had been in 48 hours. Every nation on Earth and every surviving colony had signed without debate. Old rivalries vanished. Ancient grudges were set aside. For the first time in human history, the entire species moved with a single purpose. Every factory converted to military production. Every laboratory redirected to weapons research. Every shipyard began building vessels that had never been shown to the Galactic Council. Because humanity had secrets, so many secrets. Reviewed the status of projects that had been hidden for decades. Project Prometheus, Project Leviathan, Project Orpheus. Black-budget programs that civilian governments barely knew existed. Technologies too dangerous to reveal. Weapons too terrible to acknowledge. Humanity had joined the Galactic Council 42 years ago with smiles and open hands. They had learned alien science. They had traded for alien technology. They had seemed like eager students, grateful for the scraps of knowledge the elder races chose to share. But they had never trusted anyone. The elder races had ancient weapons and vast fleets, but they had grown comfortable. They had not faced a true threat in. Their military doctrines were designed for limited conflicts, for political posturing, for the gentle enforcement of trade agreements. Humans had no such limitations. Humans had spent their entire history fighting for survival. They had developed the mathematics of total war long before they reached the stars. Called a meeting of his senior staff. They gathered in the underwater facility, men and women pulled from every branch of military service. Some had lost families in the attack. All had lost friends. Their faces were hard and their eyes were cold. They expect us to fight like a civilized species, said. They expect us to follow the rules of galactic warfare, limited engagements, protected civilians, proportional response. He paused and looked around the room. We are not going to do that. He explained his strategy. They would not strike until they were ready to end the war in a single, overwhelming blow. They would not waste resources on small victories. They would gather every weapon, every ship, every soldier humanity could produce. And when the moment came, they would unleash everything at once. No warnings, no ultimatums, no mercy. Meanwhile, human intelligence operatives slipped into space. They traveled on stolen ships with forged identities. They posed as traders, as refugees, as wandering laborers looking for work. They did not sabotage. They did not assassinate. They only watched and listened and mapped. Every military installation, every supply depot, every command center, every communication relay. The information flowed back to Earth in encrypted bursts that the Never detected. One operative was eventually captured. She was a woman named age 41, formerly a linguistics professor before the war made her a spy. The interrogators were skilled at their work. They asked her many questions about human plans, told them nothing useful, not because she was resistant to their methods, but because she genuinely did not know the details. Human intelligence operated on a strict need-to-know basis. Each agent knew only their own small piece of the puzzle. But when they demanded to know what humanity was doing during the long silence, smiled. "We are remembering," she said. The interrogator did not understand. "Remembering what?" he asked. Smile grew wider. "Remembering what we are capable of." Day 90 passed, then 100, then 120. The Supreme Commander grew increasingly frustrated. His superiors on the demanded results. Where was the human surrender? Where were the conquered territories? Where were the slaves he had promised? Had no answers. He could not find the humans. He could not predict their actions. He could not understand why they refused to behave like sensible prey. On day 127, the Galactic Council's observation network detected movement. Sensors across a dozen systems registered the same impossible readings. Ships, thousands of ships, emerging from hidden locations throughout human space, received the reports with growing horror. These were not the vessels humanity had registered with the Council. These were warships of a design he had never seen, carriers the size of moons, weapons platforms bristling with unknown technology. The human fleet numbered 12,000 vessels. This should have been impossible. Humanity had never possessed such numbers. Where had they come from? The answer was simple. Humanity had been building in secret for 40 years. Hidden shipyards in asteroid belts, ghost factories in the atmospheres of gas giants, construction facilities that existed on no official record. They had smiled and played the role of harmless newcomers while preparing for the day someone would betray them. And now that day had come. Admiral stood on the bridge of his flagship and watched his fleet assemble. 12,000 vessels, 30 million soldiers, the combined might of a species that had decided with absolute unity that they would pay for what they had done. He opened a communication channel to the Galactic Council. "This is Admiral James of the United Earth Defense Force. Humanity is about to transit through Council space. We strongly recommend that all non-combatant vessels withdraw from our path. We bear no hostility toward the Council or its members. Our quarrel is with the Alone." He paused and his voice grew cold. "But we will not be stopped." The transmission ended. The fleet began to move. And the galaxy held its breath. The elder races of the Galactic Council had seen many wars. They had witnessed the fall of empires and the extinction of species. They had watched civilizations burn across 1,000 star systems. Nothing surprised them anymore. Until now. The human fleet moved through Council space like a dark tide. 12,000 vessels traveling in perfect formation, their drives burning bright against the void. The observation networks tracked their progress with something that felt almost like fear. The High Command analyzed the fleet's composition and found results that made no sense. The power signatures exceeded anything in their databases. The weapon systems matched no known technology. The ship design seemed to violate several accepted principles of stellar engineering. Where had humanity hidden this? How had they built it? And more importantly, what else were they hiding? They attempted to communicate with the human flagship. They wished to discuss alternatives to war. Surely there was room for negotiation. They could be persuaded to release some captives, return some territory. Full-scale conflict was inefficient and wasteful. Ambassador received them on the bridge of the Remember. She was polite. She listened to their proposals. She thanked them for their concern. Then she showed them the memorial wall. The wall stretched the entire length of the command deck. Names scrolled across it in endless columns. 2.3 billion names, 2.3 billion souls. The list would take 300 years to display completely at reading speed. "Find my daughter's name," said quietly. Her name was Sophia. She was 11 years old. She wanted to be she loved the children. She trusted them. The envoys flickered with uncomfortable colors. "Ambassador," one of them said, "we understand your grief, but surely revenge is not the answer. The cycle of violence only creates more suffering." Turned to face them. Her expression was calm, but something terrible burned behind her eyes. "This is not revenge," she said. "Revenge is emotional. Revenge is chaotic. What we are about to do is much simpler." She gestured to the tactical display, where the fleet's trajectory glowed in sharp lines across the star map. "We are going to demonstrate a principle, a very simple principle that the galaxy seems to have forgotten." "And what principle is that?" Smiled. It was the smile of someone who had passed beyond grief into something harder, something colder. "Actions have consequences." She turned back to the memorial wall, dismissing the envoys with her silence. They left without another word. There was nothing else to say. Meanwhile, Admiral reviewed the intelligence reports from space. His operatives had done excellent work. Every military installation was mapped. Every fleet movement was tracked. Every weakness was identified. They had a powerful empire, but it was built on confidence, not caution. They had conquered weaker species for so long that they had forgotten what it meant to face a true threat. Their defenses were designed to intimidate, not to resist. Their fleets were organized for quick subjugation, not prolonged war. And they had no idea what was coming. Gathered his commanders for a final briefing. They assembled in the war room of the flagship, their faces illuminated by holographic displays. These were the survivors, the ones who had lost colleagues and friends and loved ones in the first attack. They had been waiting for this moment for 5 months. "The believe they know us," began. "They studied us for 3 years. They watched our technology, our tactics, our social structures. They think they understand what humanity is capable of." He brought up a new display. Project designations scrolled across the screen, names that had been classified at the highest levels, weapons that had never been tested outside of simulation. "They are wrong." He outlined the battle plan. The fleet would approach Prime in a standard formation, exactly what the enemy would expect. They would commit their defensive forces, confident in their numerical superiority, and then humanity would reveal what they had been building in secret. Project Prometheus, missiles that created microscopic black holes at their point of impact. The physics had been considered impossible until human scientists proved otherwise. The weapons had never been used in combat. They would be the first to experience them. Project Leviathan, autonomous combat drones controlled by artificial intelligence. The Galactic Council had strict regulations against such systems, considering them too dangerous. Humanity had agreed to these regulations publicly while continuing development in secret. The drones were faster, more precise, and more ruthless than any organic pilot. Project Orpheus. This was the weapon that hesitated to describe. Even among his hardened commanders, the details produced uncomfortable silence. It targeted the neural network, the telepathic system that connected their entire species. It would turn their greatest strength into their worst nightmare. "We will not offer terms," concluded. "We will not accept surrender. We will not stop until the supremacy understands exactly what they have awakened." One commander raised a concern. "Admiral, the Galactic Council may object to our methods. Some of these weapons violate their regulations." Nodded slowly. "The Council had 42 years to treat us as equals. They chose to treat us as children instead. They watched the massacre our people and advised us to surrender." His voice hardened. "We are done asking for permission." The fleet crossed into space on day 131. The border stations detected them immediately and transmitted warnings to the Supreme Commander. Received the reports with something approaching relief. Finally, the humans had stopped hiding. Now they would learn what it meant to challenge the supremacy. He assembled his defense fleet, 3 times the size of the human force, equipped with weapons that had crushed 100 species before. He positioned them in a perfect formation around Prime, daring the humans to attack. The human fleet approached at a steady pace. No communication, no demands, no attempt at negotiation. Studied their formation and found it puzzling. They were advancing in a standard assault pattern, nothing innovative or threatening. Did they truly believe that simple courage would overcome superior numbers and firepower? He would teach them otherwise. All vessels, he commanded, prepare to engage. Across thousands of ships, soldiers their weapons. They had trained for this their entire lives. They had conquered species far older and more advanced than humanity. This would be a quick battle, a demonstration of supremacy power. The human fleet came closer, and then it stopped. For a long moment, nothing happened. The two fleets faced each other across the void, waited for the human attack. It did not come. Instead, a single message arrived from the human flagship. It contained only 6 words. Remember, remember our dead. And then the universe changed. The first Prometheus missile launched. Watched it approach on his sensors, a single small projectile that his defenses could easily intercept. He almost laughed at the feeble attack. Then the missile reached his lead battleship, and the battleship vanished. Not destroyed, vanished, compressed into a point of infinite density by a temporary black hole that flickered into existence and disappeared. One moment, a vessel carrying 5,000 soldiers existed. The next moment, nothing remained but a brief distortion in space. Stared at his displays in disbelief. This was impossible. This violated the fundamental laws of physics as he understood them. The second missile launched, then the third, then hundreds. The defense fleet began to die. And Supreme Commander finally understood what humanity had been doing during all those months of silence. They had been building horrors. The Battle of Prime lasted 11 hours. In that time, an empire that had terrorized the galaxy learned what it meant to face an enemy with nothing left to lose. Supreme Commander watched his fleet die in ways that understanding. The Prometheus missiles continued their terrible work, erasing capital ships from existence with casual precision. Shielding technology, designed to resist energy weapons and kinetic impacts, offered no protection against artificial singularities. The laws of physics did not care about defensive systems. But the missiles were only the beginning. From the human fleet emerged swarms of smaller craft, the Leviathan drones. They moved at speeds that organic pilots could not match, coordinated by artificial minds that calculated optimal attack vectors in microseconds. Each drone was a perfect predator, designed for one purpose only: destruction. Ordered his surviving vessels to target the drones. His gunners tried, but the machines were too fast, too agile, too numerous. They slipped through defensive fire like water through fingers. They attached to hulls and detonated with precise force, cracking open warships like eggs. The commanders screamed for reinforcements. None came. Every reserve fleet, every defensive station, every patrol ship had already been committed to the battle. The humans had waited until all forces were concentrated in one place. Now they were destroying everything at once. But even as his fleet crumbled, clung to one hope: the neural network, the telepathic bond that connected every member of his species across the stars. Through this network, they shared thoughts, emotions, memories. It was their greatest advantage, allowing perfect coordination across any distance. Prepared to broadcast a message through the network, a call for every in the galaxy to rise against the human threat. Civilians would become soldiers. Hidden cells on conquered worlds would activate. The entire species would unite in a final desperate effort. He reached for the network and screamed. Project Orpheus activated. The human cyberwarfare specialists had spent 3 years studying the neural network. The refugees had provided perfect access. Every time a connected to the network in human space, human systems had watched, analyzed, learned, and planted tiny fragments of code that spread silently through the entire system. Now those fragments awakened. They did not destroy the network. That would have been too simple. Instead, they created a feedback loop of absolute horror. Every connected to the network suddenly experienced their worst memories, not remembered them, experienced them, lived through them again with perfect clarity. Every failure, every humiliation, every moment of fear and pain and loss, all at once, all together. Supreme Commander relived the day his father had cast him out of the family for showing weakness. He felt the shame burn through him as fresh as the moment it happened. A captain across the fleet experienced the death of her entire crew in a training accident, feeling each loss as if it occurred now. A gunner remembered the first time he had killed, the horror of watching life fade from eyes that had begged for mercy. Billions of across the Empire screamed as one. Soldiers dropped their weapons. Pilots lost control of their vessels. Command structures collapsed as officers writhed in psychological agony. The fleet did not retreat. It simply stopped functioning. Admiral watched the enemy ships drift helpless in the void. His own crew reported the communication channels, now filled with nothing but confused moaning and whimpering. The proud empire that had slaughtered 2.3 billion humans was reduced to a species in collective trauma. Part of him felt satisfaction. Most of him felt nothing at all. He opened a communication channel to the flagship. Supreme Commander's face appeared on the screen. The alien leader looked broken, his eyes unfocused, his silver skin pale with shock. "You asked for our surrender," said quietly. "Here is our answer." The human fleet moved into position around Prime, but they did not fire on the planet. They did not bomb the cities or poison the atmosphere or deploy the biological weapons that would have been simple to create. Instead, they deployed something different. The quarantine. Thousands of automated defense platforms launched from human carriers. They spread across the system in a perfect shell, positioning themselves at every jump point, every possible exit route. Each platform was armed with Prometheus warheads. Each was controlled by Leviathan AI. Each was designed to last for centuries without maintenance. Nothing would enter the system. Nothing would leave. Ambassador broadcast her message to the galaxy. Her face appeared on screens across 1,000 worlds. "The supremacy has been defeated," she said. "Their fleet is destroyed. Their neural network has been neutralized. Their empire is finished." She paused, letting the words sink in. "We have not destroyed them. Humanity does not seek genocide. We are not like them." Her expression hardened. "But they will face consequences for what they did. Their system is now under permanent quarantine. No ships in or out. No communications. No trade. No contact with the outside galaxy." She explained the terms. They would live. They would rebuild their society. They would have 100 years to change, to learn the value of trust, to understand what it meant to keep a promise, to become something worthy of rejoining galactic civilization. "In 100 years," continued, "humanity will return. We will assess whether they have learned from their crimes, if they have grown, if they have changed, if they have become capable of honest peace. We will welcome them back to the community of species." Her voice dropped to something cold and final. "If they have not, we have other projects, projects we have not yet revealed, projects we hope we never have to use." She ended the transmission. Across the galaxy, species that had watched the battle in stunned silence tried to process what they had witnessed. The supremacy, An empire that had conquered half the galaxy in ancient times had been defeated in 11 hours by a species that most had considered primitive. The weapons humanity had deployed violated known physics. The tactical precision had exceeded anything in galactic records. The ruthlessness had surprised even the most hardened observers. But it was the quarantine that truly unsettled the elder races. Humanity had not destroyed their enemies. They had imprisoned them. They had created a punishment that would last for a century. They had demonstrated the patience to let their enemies suffer slowly rather than dying quickly. This was not the behavior of an emotional young species acting on rage. This was calculated. This was methodical. This was terrifying. The Galactic Council convened an emergency session. The demanded explanations. The flickered with colors that suggested deep concern. The simply stared at the human representatives with something like awe. Admiral addressed the assembly. His voice was tired but steady. Humanity did not want this war, he said. We extended friendship to the. We opened our homes to their people. We trusted them when no one else would. He looked around the chamber at the alien faces watching him. They killed 2.3 billion of our people. Children, families, communities. They used our compassion as a weapon against us. And now, he concluded, they are learning what that mistake cost them. He left the chamber without waiting for a response. There was nothing more to say. On the bridge of the Remember, Ambassador stood alone before the memorial wall. The names continued to scroll, endless and eternal. She found Sophia's name. Her daughter's face smiled from a small photograph attached to the record, 11 years old, full of hope, full of trust. We won, whispered. I don't know if that matters. I don't know if anything matters anymore, but we won. The stars burned cold and distant outside the viewport. The system grew smaller behind them as the fleet began its journey home. An empire had fallen, a lesson had been taught, and humanity had shown the galaxy exactly what they were capable of when pushed too far. The question now was simple. Would anyone else be foolish enough to test them again? 1 year had passed since the quarantine. The galaxy was different now, not through conquest, not through force, but through something more subtle, something that had settled into the bones of every species that had witnessed the war. Respect, and behind the respect, fear. The Galactic Council still met in its ancient chamber. The elder races still debated policy and trade and the endless details of interstellar civilization. But the mood had changed. When human representatives spoke, others listened. When humanity expressed an opinion, others considered it carefully. No one said this openly. No one acknowledged the shift in power, but everyone felt it. Ambassador stood before the assembly for a formal ceremony. Today, humanity would be elevated from probationary member to full council status. No more supervision, no more condescension, no more patient explanations of how civilized species behaved. The vote had been unanimous. Suspected this reflected wisdom rather than affection. The High Speaker made the announcement in formal tones. He praised humanity's resilience, their determination, their remarkable growth as a species. He did not mention the 12,000 warships or the weapons that violated known physics. Some things were better left unsaid. Accepted the ceremonial token of membership with appropriate grace. She had practiced this moment many times, the diplomatic smile, the humble words of gratitude, the careful acknowledgement of the council's guidance. Then she set aside the prepared speech and spoke from her heart. We did not ask for this war, she said. We extended our hand in friendship and had it bitten. We opened our homes and were stabbed in our sleep. 2 billion of our people died because we dared to show compassion. The chamber fell silent. The elder races shifted uncomfortably. They had hoped the ceremony would remain pleasant and forgettable. His voice hardened. Let this be a lesson to the galaxy. Humanity will always choose peace first. We will always offer mercy first. We will always extend trust first." She paused and looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes of every ambassador, every representative, every being who had once dismissed humans as emotional primitives. "But our patience is not weakness, our kindness is not foolishness, and our mercy, once betrayed, will not be offered twice." She let the words hang in the air. "We do not seek empire. We do not desire dominion over other species. We simply want to live among the stars in peace, to explore, to learn, to grow alongside our galactic neighbors." Her expression softened slightly. "But understand this. Earth remembers. Earth always remembers. Every act of kindness shown to us, we will repay many times over. Every betrayal, we will answer in kind." The ceremony concluded in silence. No applause, no celebration, just a quiet understanding that something fundamental had changed. In the months that followed, humanity proved true to its words. They did not seek expansion. They did not demand tribute. They simply rebuilt their colonies, honored their dead, and continued their exploration of the universe. But they also did not forget. The quarantine around Prime remained in place. Human observation satellites monitored the system constantly, recording everything that happened on the imprisoned world. They were rebuilding their society, just as humanity had predicted. But whether they were learning the right lessons remained to be seen. Other species watched and drew their own conclusions. Trade with humanity increased dramatically. Diplomatic relations improved. Several species that had previously ignored human requests for cooperation suddenly became very helpful. The in particular became close allies. Their ambassador approached privately after the elevation ceremony. "We always knew there was more to your species than you showed us," Thoa said. "We saw hints of it. The way your people survived the determination in your eyes, the patience with which you endured our condescension. Smiled, you were kinder to us than most." "We were fools like the rest," Thea admitted. "We saw your compassion and assumed it was softness. We saw your hope and assumed it was naivety. We did not understand that these things can exist alongside strength." The ambassador paused. "What did you call it? That combination of mercy and consequence?" "Justice," said. They considered this word. "I think," they said slowly, "that the galaxy has not seen true justice in a very long time. The elder races have grown comfortable. We resolve conflicts through negotiation because we have forgotten how to fight. We compromise because we fear commitment." They looked with something like admiration. "Your species reminds us that some things are worth fighting for. That trust must be earned, not assumed. That kindness requires strength to protect it." Nodded, she understood what Thea was saying. The galaxy had become complacent. Species had forgotten that civilization required effort to maintain. That peace was not the absence of conflict but the presence of justice. Humanity had reminded them. On 442b, the rebuilt colony flourished. The survivors had returned to find their world but not destroyed. The bioweapon had been neutralized. The infrastructure had been repaired. Life continued. At the center of the main settlement stood a new monument. It had taken 6 months to construct. It contained 2.3 billion names engraved on walls of polished obsidian that stretched toward the sky. At its heart, a single inscription. "They were loved, they are remembered, they are avenged." Visited on the anniversary of the attack. She walked among the names, touching the cold stone, remembering faces she would never see again. She found Sophia's name in the section dedicated to children. Her daughter smiled from a small holographic display, frozen forever at 11 years old. "I wish you could see what we built," whispered. "A galaxy where trust means something, where promises matter, where compassion is protected by strength." She placed a flower beneath the name. "You would have loved it. You always believed in making friends with everyone. You always thought kindness was the answer." She smiled through her tears. You were right in a way. Kindness is the answer, but sometimes you have to show people what happens when they betray it. She stood in silence for a long moment, feeling the weight of everything that had happened. The grief would never fully fade. The loss would never fully heal, but purpose gave her a reason to continue. Across the galaxy, species that had once viewed humanity as a curiosity now viewed them differently. Not as enemies, not as conquerors, but as something perhaps more unsettling. A species capable of infinite compassion and infinite consequence in equal measure. They remained isolated in their quarantine system. 99 years remained before humanity would return to assess their progress. Many wondered what would happen then. Admiral, now retired, spent his remaining years writing a history of the war. He wanted future generations to understand what had happened and why. In the final chapter, he wrote words that would become famous throughout human space. We are not a violent species by nature. We would prefer peace to war, cooperation to conflict, friendship to enmity. But we are a species shaped by our history. We survived a death world. We survived each other. We survived the long climb to the stars. We know what it costs to trust. We know what it risks to show mercy. And we know what it takes to ensure that our trust and mercy are not exploited. The galaxy has learned this now. Perhaps they will remember. Perhaps they will not. If they forget, we will remind them. Earth always remembers. The stars continued to burn in the endless dark. Humanity continued its journey among them. The first chapter of their galactic story was complete. What came next remained to be written, but one thing was certain. No one would underestimate them again.